Mercy General's pediatric ICU smells like antiseptic and the particular kind of silence that comes before disaster. Natalie Hayes moves through the ward invisible, the way she has perfected over 3 years, checking monitors with hands that know exactly what they're doing because those hands learned in places Houston would never imagine. Her badge reads N. Hayes, RN, and nothing else. No rank. No history. No call sign. The fluorescent lights above hum their constant electric drone, and she walks beneath them like someone who has learned to move through noise without making any. Room 347 is where it starts. She notices the father first, Sergeant Major Dawson, standing at rigid attention beside his son's bed, his posture the kind that doesn't bend even when the world has already broken him. His uniform is pressed despite 18 hours of vigil. His eyes are the color of storm clouds. Behind him, arranged in the hallway like pallbearers at a funeral that hasn't happened yet, are the neurology team. 15 of them. She counted when they arrived this morning. 15 doctors, every specialist Mercy General could assemble, and every single one has already made their decision before they even walk into the room. Complete transection of the spinal cord at T6. Permanent paralysis. Recommend withdrawing life support. 8-year-old Liam Dawson lies motionless on the hospital bed, small the way children are small, fragile in a way that makes every machine around him seem enormous and cruel. His eyes track movement still. His lungs move because a ventilator moves them. His heart beats because his heart remembers how. But according to the neurology consensus, nothing below his shoulders will ever move again. Natalie checks his pulse at 7:14 a.m., before rounds, before the doctors arrive with their certainty and their authority and their clean white coats. She is alone with Liam and Sergeant Major Dawson, and she moves with the kind of precision that comes from muscle memory, thousands of foreplacements, thousands of vital sign checks, thousands of moments where her hands did exactly what needed doing because hesitation cost lives. The ventilator hisses its rhythmic breath. The heart monitor beeps its steady rhythm. She touches Liam's foot gently, just a checking touch, the way a nurse checks 1,000 times per shift without thinking about it. She feels it before she sees it. A movement. Not the involuntary twitch of a cooling body. Something deliberate. Something that requires intention. Liam's toes. Moving. Natalie's jaw tightens, not visibly, just a single muscle beneath her skin recognizing data, and she touches his foot again. This time she watches. Focused. Present. The way she learned to observe in Tikrit, where the difference between noticing and missing could measure itself in body bags. His toes respond. Not with full strength. Not with the control of a child who still owns his legs. But responding. Responsive. The kind of muscular activation that requires an intact neural pathway from his brain to his feet. Incomplete cord damage. Not complete transection. This changes everything. Except it changes nothing, because 15 doctors have already decided, and Natalie Hayes is just a nurse, and nurses don't contradict the consensus. Nurses don't see things that highly trained neurologists have already ruled out. Nurses certainly don't have the kind of experience that allows them to read the language of micro-movements the way someone who has held dying Marines and watched their eyes go fixed and distant understands the specific vocabulary of what bodies can and cannot do. She straightens up and adjusts Liam's blanket like she is doing routine care. Nothing unusual. Nothing worth remarking on. Her hand brushes her scrub pocket where the old challenge coin sits against her ribs, cold and smooth, the weight of it grounding her into the present moment. From the FOB Shankin Loga province to this pediatric ICU in Houston. From combat medic to invisible hospital nurse. From the person who was to the person she pretends to be. Sergeant Major Dawson watches her with the kind of attention that soldiers develop when they have learned to recognize people who understand burden. Their eyes meet for just a moment. He nods slightly. She nods back. No words. Words would require explanations she cannot give. Dr. Hargrove arrives at 7:13 a.m. with the presence of someone accustomed to being the smartest person in any room, his white coat pristine, his expression already settled into the kind of certainty that comes from being right 94% of the time. His reputation precedes him through Mercy General's corridors like a force of nature, head of neurology, published researcher, board member of the hospital's Quality Assurance Committee, the kind of physician whose word shapes protocol and whose judgment is rarely questioned. Behind him walk the rest of the neurology team, 11 other specialists who have already reviewed Liam's MRI, his CT scans, his physical examination findings. The consensus is complete. The decision is made. Natalie steps back from the bedside, positioning herself near the wall monitors where she is visible but not intrusive. This is the choreography she has learned: how to be present without being noticed, how to see without drawing attention, how to remain in a room while becoming part of its architecture. Her leg aches where the shrapnel sits, a dull reminder that healing is never complete, but she distributes her weight evenly and lets nothing show on her face. Dr. Hargrove approaches the bed with the kind of purposeful stride that fills the room. His voice, when he speaks, sounds like authority measured in precisely calibrated syllables. "Sergeant Major Dawson, I know this is difficult news." He doesn't wait for a response. He doesn't ask permission to explain what Liam's future will be. He simply continues, as if the outcome is self-evident, already written into the child's spine in ways that cannot be changed. "The damage to your son's spinal cord is extensive. Our imaging shows complete disruption at the Tier 6 level. His motor function below this point is permanently lost. There is no pathway for neural recovery at this severity." The words hang in the room like a sentence being carried out. Complete transection. Permanently lost. No pathway for recovery. Each phrase seals another door. The fluorescent lights hum louder, or perhaps they do not, and Natalie only hears them that way because she understands what is about to happen. She has seen this before, not in a hospital, but in tents on the edge of Fallujah, when doctors had to decide which wounded Marines could be saved and which could not, when triage meant choosing between impossible options. Except Liam's toes moved. She saw it. Movement that should not exist according to the MRI, according to the diagnosis, according to the 15-doctor consensus that fills the room with its collective weight. The absence of movement they expected is what they will record. The absence of hope is what they will recommend. "We recommend comfort care," Dr. Hargrove continues. His eyes do not leave the child. There is something in his expression that might be compassion, or might be the professional distance that comes from having made similar recommendations 200 times before. Withdrawing mechanical support would allow your son to pass peacefully, without suffering. We can manage pain. We can maintain his dignity. This is often the most humane course of action. Sergeant Major Dawson's hands clench and unclench at his sides. His jaw works as though he is chewing on the words and finding them indigestible. He does not speak. He does not argue. He simply stands there, at attention beside his son's hospital bed, and absorbs the weight of 15 expert opinions telling him that his child is already gone, that the body on the bed is merely a shell still using the machine to breathe. Natalie's eyes narrow almost imperceptibly. Not visible. Not the kind of thing anyone would notice. But the slight constriction of her pupils as she processes the information, catalogues it, knows with absolute certainty that this consensus is built on incomplete data. She has seen incomplete spinal injuries before. She has watched Marines regain function that neurologists had declared permanently lost. She has held the hands of soldiers who were told they would never walk again and then did. Not always. But sometimes. Sometimes survival looks like possibility when you know how to read the signs. Dr. Hargrove's attention shifts, and for a moment he seems to notice her standing by the monitors, quiet and unremarkable. His gaze passes over her like light through glass and settles on nothing worth examining. She is part of the background. She is one of the anonymous staff members who facilitate his work without requiring acknowledgement. He has already forgotten she exists. But she has not forgotten what she saw. The room begins to move again as the neurology team makes notes and discusses follow-up care and explains to Sergeant Major Dawson the medications that will make his son's final hours comfortable. The conversation flows around them both, Natalie and Liam, as though they are objects in the room rather than people with agency or voice. This is how hospitals work for people without authority. You remain still. You observe. You do not speak unless spoken to. You certainly do not contradict the collective wisdom of 15 highly trained specialists who spent decades learning things that night shift nurses could never possibly understand. Natalie adjusts the for infusion rate and checks the heart monitor again, and her hands move with the kind of precision that comes from knowing exactly what they are doing. Nobody is watching her. Nobody ever watches the nurse. She is the infrastructure, the invisible support system that makes medicine possible. She is someone who has learned to survive by being unremarkable. But beneath her scrubs, against her ribs, the challenge coin sits cold and solid against her skin, a small piece of metal stamped with the insignia of the Naval Special Warfare Command, a reminder of who she was before she became someone ordinary, before she chose the pediatric ICU in Houston over the weight of 3 Marines whose names she still says aloud at 0300 hours when the insomnia takes her. Morning rounds at Mercy General start at 6:22 a.m., and Natalie Hayes arrives at Liam's room 17 minutes early. She's already performed her neuro checks, toe movement present, consistent, responsive to stimulation. Twice in 4 hours. The kind of detail that 15 neurologists somehow missed. She documents everything in her careful handwriting, the kind that leaves no room for interpretation, and then she steps back from the bed because she knows what's coming. Dr. Hargrove enters with his entourage. 2 senior residents, 3 medical students, an attending from orthopedics who's observing. He moves through the pediatric ICU like a man accustomed to rooms parting before him, his white coat pressed so sharp it could cut glass, his stethoscope draped across his shoulders like a general's insignia. Behind him, Sergeant Major Dawson stands with his arms crossed, his jaw tight, his eyes fixed on his son's face with the intensity of a man who's learned that attention is the only currency left to spend. Hargrove opens Liam's chart. His reading glasses sit halfway down his nose. He flips through 3 pages without looking up, and when he finally speaks, his voice carries the weight of 23 years in neurology, of board certifications and published papers and a reputation built on diagnostic precision. The imaging is conclusive. T for complete transection. Spinal cord is severed. At this point, we're managing comfort care until the family is ready to make end-of-life decisions. Natalie steps forward. Not far. Just enough to be heard over the ventilator's mechanical whisper. During passive range of motion exercises yesterday, I observed toe movement. Bilateral. Responsive to stimulation. The room goes quiet in that particular way hospital rooms go quiet, not silent, but full of the sound of people choosing not to speak. The monitors keep their rhythm. The ventilator keeps its wheeze. Hargrove lowers his glasses and turns toward her with a kind of slowness that suggests his deciding how much patience he's willing to spend. Nurse Hayes. How long have you been in pediatric neurology? For years, doctor. I've been in neurology for 23. He doesn't blink. 15 specialists, 15, have examined this child. Neurologists. Pediatric specialists. Trauma surgeons from the university. Are you suggesting they're all wrong? Natalie takes one measured breath. The kind of breath she learned in Tikrit, the kind that keeps your hand steady when the world is coming apart. I'm suggesting incomplete cord damage presents differently than complete transection. The reflexes. Sergeant Major. Hargrove turns his back to her entirely, his posture a physical dismissal. Some nurses get emotionally attached and see hope where none exists. It's kind. It's human. But it's cruel to a family already grieving. Your son has complete transection at T4. I need you to understand that Nurse Nightingale here is giving you false hope because she can't accept clinical reality. One of the medical students almost smiles. It's the kind of smile people offer when they're witnessing hierarchy in action, when they're learning what happens to people who challenge the established order. Natalie sees it. She always sees it. Her hands don't clench. Her jaw doesn't tighten. The composure holds because it always holds, because she learned a long time ago that the trembling isn't fear, it's restraint. I've triaged more trauma than this entire department combined. Her voice is quiet, steady as a surgical laser. And that child's reflexes are not consistent with complete transection. Hargrove's smile is the kind that comes from knowing he controls the room. Triaged where, nurse? Houston General's ER. He doesn't wait for an answer. He never waits. Waiting implies the other person has something worth hearing. We'll discuss your emotional regulation in your performance review. He closes the chart with a decisive snap and turns back to his residents. Comfort care measures only. No further aggressive intervention. Document accordingly. As they file out, one resident, a young woman with dark hair pulled back tight, avoids Natalie's eyes. The attending from orthopedics doesn't even glance in her direction. Sergeant Major Dawson watches the door close behind them, and when he looks back at his son, his shoulders sag in a way that suggests the fight just left his body. Natalie finishes her charting in silence. The break room at 11:24 a.m. is where the real punishment happens. Natalie enters with her packed sandwich, turkey and mustard on wheat, and sits at the table near the window. The senior nurses are there: Patterson, who's been at Mercy General for 12 years. Reeves, who mentored Natalie through her first year. Morrison, who helped her find the apartment 3 blocks from the hospital. They go quiet when she sits down. One by one, they stand. One by one, they dump their trash into the receptacle and leave without speaking. Natalie sits alone at the table for 6 people. The sandwich tastes like nothing. By 3 p.m., a formal write-up appears on the unit board. Printed on hospital letterhead. Laminated with a date stamp. Where everyone can see it. Where it can't be ignored or dismissed or pretended away. The font is clinical. The language is precise. Natalie Hayes, contradicting physician assessments, providing false hope to families, undermining treatment team cohesion. Formal disciplinary action pending. A young resident approaches her at the medication cart around 3:45. His name tag says Palmer, MD. His eyes are nervous. My attending says I shouldn't be seen talking to you. Natalie continues charting without looking up. Then you should probably go. He wasn't wrong though. About the toe movement. I saw it too. 3 times during night shift. She doesn't respond. Not because she has nothing to say, but because saying anything would only drag him down with her. She understands institutional gravity. She understands how it pulls people toward safety, toward the center of power, away from anyone dangerous enough to challenge it. She nods once, and he leaves. That evening, as the evening shift transitions to nights and the ICU settles into that particular rhythm of reduced light and reduced voices, Sergeant Major Dawson finds her updating Liam's chart at the nurse's station. His uniform is still immaculate, marine dress blues don't crease if you don't crease, but his face looks like he's aged 3 weeks in 3 days. I don't know what to believe anymore. His voice carries the exhaustion of a man who's used to orders and clarity and now has neither. The doctors are saying one thing. You're saying something different. How do I know who's right? Natalie sets down her pen. She meets his eyes with the kind of calm that comes from having already survived the worst the world can offer. From Tikrit. From watching your people bleed out on your boots. From learning that sometimes the price of survival is becoming unremarkable enough to survive at all. Believe what you see in your son. Her voice is quiet. Not what they tell you to see. Sergeant Major Dawson nods slowly. He doesn't smile. But his shoulders square, just slightly, and when he turns back toward his son's room, he moves like a man who's remembered what command looks like. Natalie returns to her charting. In the locker room, tucked beneath her second pair of scrubs, her combat boots rest in their permanent spot, worn leather, the laces still knotted from Tikrit, the soles carrying the dust of 3 deployments. She doesn't look at them anymore. The coin against her ribs is enough. The silence is enough. The ability to save one child while the rest of the department insists on letting him die, that's everything. But that wasn't the worst part. Not even close. The fourth shift arrives like every other shift, antiseptic and fluorescent and indifferent to the small wars being fought in every room. Natalie moves through the pediatric ICU at Mercy General with the same invisible efficiency she's perfected across a decade of silence, but something is different tonight. Liam's monitors tell a story she learned to read in Tikrit, where the difference between a stable patient and a dying one often came down to 30 seconds and steady hands. At 0200 hours, she's charting at the bedside when the oxygen saturation begins its descent. 98%. Normal. Expected for a sleeping 8-year-old on room air with supplemental oxygen running at 2 liters through nasal cannula. But the number doesn't hold. It drops like a stone in dark water. 95. 92. 89. 3 minutes. That's all it takes. Her head doesn't snap up. Her breathing doesn't change. The trembling wasn't panic, it was the exact opposite, the crystalline calm of someone whose muscle memory has been waiting for permission to wake up. She moves to the bedside without calling for help. Not yet. Observation first. That's the rule she learned before she learned to be invisible. The boy's small chest rises and falls, but the rhythm is wrong. The work of breathing has changed. His retractions are deeper now, intercostal muscles pulling hard beneath skin that's too pale beneath the monitor's blue glow. She places her hand flat on his ribcage. The rise and fall is asymmetrical. Left side moves. Right side barely breathes. She runs her fingers along the right anterior chest wall, palpating the intercostal spaces with the precision of someone who's felt 100 chests in 100 crisis moments, and their tracheal deviation. His windpipe is shifted left, away from the pneumothorax that's building pressure inside his right hemithorax like a bomb with no timer. The rib fracture. The one the radiologists missed. The one that perforated the lung tissue behind it and is now filling the space between his visceral and parietal pleura with air, collapsing the lung, compressing the heart, crushing the boy's ability to breathe. Tension pneumothorax. The kind that kills fast. The kind that doesn't care how many doctors are in the building. Natalie walks to the supply cabinet. Not running. Not sprinting. Walking like she has all the time in the world, because panic is a luxury she surrendered 18 years ago. Her hands move on their own now. The 14-gauge angiocath needle is where it always is, sterile and waiting like a weapon that hasn't been fired. She tears the packaging with her teeth, a detail that would horrify the infection control nurses if they were watching, but they're not watching, because nobody watches the invisible nurse in the middle of the night. She palpates the second intercostal space at the midclavicular line. The anatomical landmark is simple, 2 ribs down from the collarbone, straight down the middle of the chest. The needle goes in at a 45-degree angle, sliding through skin, subcutaneous tissue, parietal pleura, and then the hiss. Air escaping. The sound of pressure releasing. The sound of a lung re-expanding. The sound of a child's oxygen saturation climbing back toward life. 87. 90. 94. The monitors respond before anyone else can. The needle stays in place. The catheter slides forward and the needle retracts, leaving plastic tubing venting the pneumothorax into the Houston night air. Oxygen saturation holds at 96. The work of breathing eases. The retractions soften. The trachea stays deviated, but the acute threat, the immediate, catastrophic, 10-minute until arrest threat, has been severed. She secures the catheter with tape. Not a rush. Neat. Clean. Professional. The kind of tape job that would pass inspection if anyone ever bothered to inspect the invisible nurse. The code team arrives 7 minutes later. The attending physician is still in the elevator when Natalie steps back from the bedside and crosses her arms. Chest imaging already ordered. Already showing what she knew it would show. The radiologist will confirm it in writing, pneumothorax, right side, secondary to acute rib fracture, now decompressed, no acute distress noted. The attending will nod like he knew this all along. The resident will make a note about observational nursing skills. Dr. Hargrove will see the imaging report and feel something cold move through his chest, not concern for the patient, but calculation. The boy who was supposed to be a clean withdrawal of care case is instead a patient whose condition is improving. A patient who contradicts the 15-doctor consensus. A patient who required an emergency procedure that the head of neurology said would never be necessary. Natalie walks to the break room. It's 0217 hours. The night shift skeleton crew is scattered across the hospital. She's alone with her coffee and the weight of what she just did. Nobody will know. Not until the morning rounds, not until the imaging results get flagged, not until Dr. Hargrove reads the chart note and sees her name in the critical action column. She'd called for the code team, of course. She'd done everything by protocol. She'd just happened to be the one standing beside the bedside when his lung collapsed, and she'd just happened to have the training to recognize what was happening, and she'd just happened to move faster than a phone call could travel. Muscle memory. That's what they'd call it if they ever bothered to look. Just a well-trained nurse doing exactly what the protocol said to do. Nothing suspicious. Nothing that violated the physician-driven hierarchy of Mercy General. Nothing that contradicted the verdict of 15 doctors who'd already closed the case on Liam Dawson's body and written off his future. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part came at 0600 hours when Drive Hargrove's phone rang at his house in the Heights, and the voice on the other end was Sergeant Major Dawson, his words carrying the flat precision of a military commander processing new intelligence. Dr. Hargrove, I need to understand something. My son's oxygen saturation dropped to 63 last night. There was an emergency procedure performed. The resident charted that a catheter decompression was indicated. I've been reading medical literature for the past 3 hours. Pause. My question is simple. Who saved my son's life at 0202 hours? The phone line carried the sound of a man who'd just realized he'd been wrong about something important. And the silence after that question was the sound of Dr. Hargrove understanding, with absolute clarity, that the narrative he'd constructed, the one where a reckless nurse contradicted careful physicians and needed to be removed from the unit, was about to become significantly more complicated. The emergency board meeting was called before Natalie's hands stopped shaking. Before Liam's oxygen saturation stabilized at 94%. Before anyone outside the pediatric ICU understood what had actually happened in the darkness of room 412 at 2 in the morning. Dr. Hargrove stood at the head of the polished conference table at 4:15 that afternoon, his jaw clenched tight as a fist, his voice steady as surgical steel. We have a protocol breach. A serious one. 23 physicians sat in silence, waiting. The fluorescent lights hummed their flat, merciless hum. A pediatric nurse performed an emergency procedure without physician authorization. Needle decompression. On a child. One of the attending surgeons shifted. The patient's vitals are stable. That is not the point, Hargrove said. His tone was the voice of a man who understood authority the way a blade understands its edge. The point is scope of practice. The point is chain of command. He paused, letting the words settle like sediment. If we allow nurses to override physician judgment, we lose control of this department. We lose control of outcomes. The room absorbed this. Nobody disagreed. Nobody asked why a nurse would risk her license to perform a procedure unless something invisible to 15 doctors was clearly visible to her. By 4:30, Hargrove's hands were moving across his phone with the precision of a man deploying assets. The Kendall family, they'd had a critical anterior wall MI 3 years ago, and Hargrove had been the one to catch it at 2 in the morning when the morning cardiologist had missed it. They donated $450,000 annually to Mercy General. The Morrison family, their daughter survived a perforated appendix because Hargrove had advocated for aggressive imaging when others said appendicitis was unlikely. They'd endowed the neurology research wing. This is a precedent issue, he told Kendall over the phone, his voice smooth as oil on still water. We need to maintain standards. Especially in pediatrics. Silence on the other end. Then, whatever you need, doctor. The State Nursing Board investigator received her call at 5 o'clock. A formal complaint. Scope of practice violation. A nurse operating outside her certification. The words were precise and surgical and left no room for context. "We'll need to interview her," the investigator said. "She's already been suspended pending investigation," Hargrove replied. "I want to move quickly on this." Outside legal counsel was engaged by 5:15. Outside legal counsel with teeth and billing rates that climbed like altitudes. They reviewed Natalie's employment file, searching for gaps, inconsistencies, anything that could be weaponized. Her nursing degree from Houston Baptist University. Her RN licensure from 2009. Her hospital credentials updated annually. Her reference checks from her previous position, all positive, all glowing, all utterly unhelpful. No ammunition there. But there didn't need to be. The complaint itself was the weapon. By 6 o'clock, Natalie was sitting in a small office with 2 human resources representatives and a security escort. No union rep. She'd asked and been told one was not necessary. This was a preliminary discussion. "You performed a medical procedure," the HR director said. Her name was Patricia Vine, and she had the manner of someone counting down to retirement. Without authorization. "The patient was coding," Natalie said. Her voice was level. Underwater calm. Tension pneumothorax. The attending was en route. O2 was dropping. "That's not your decision to make," the second representative said. "A man named Chen. That's a physician's call." The physician wasn't there. "Then you wait. Or you call a code." Natalie said nothing. What could she say? That she'd felt the deviation of his trachea the way a seismograph reads the earth before it moves. That in Tikrit, in the rubble of an aid station that had taken a direct hit, she'd performed the same procedure on a 19-year-old from Nebraska with a sucking chest wound and no time for chain of command. That she'd done it 47 times in theater, and maybe 8 of those lives wouldn't exist without that needle going in? "You're suspended effective immediately," Patricia Vine said. "Pending investigation by the state board. You'll need to turn in your badge and hospital credentials." The walk from HR to the main lobby felt like moving through liquid concrete. Security stayed 2 steps behind. Not close enough to touch her. Close enough to ensure she left. The lobby was evening crowded, visitors bringing flowers, discharge coordinators pushing wheelchairs, families standing in clusters of worry and relief. Every conversation seemed to stop as she passed. A resident she'd trained to start a difficult for in a newborn looked up from a conversation and their eyes met for 2 seconds. The resident looked away. Another nurse, Sarah, who'd borrowed Natalie's notes on pediatric lung sounds last month, was suddenly very interested in her phone. The automatic doors slid open and Houston's September heat hit like a wall. Rain was coming in from the Gulf, humidity so thick it felt like breathing water. Natalie's hands, which had held rib cages and compressed hearts and counted out medications and never wavered during the worst moments, were shaking now. Shaking in a way that had nothing to do with adrenaline and everything to do with loss. She drove home in scrubs stained with Liam's blood, just a trace amount, almost invisible, but visible enough to her. The rental house was a small 3-bedroom in a quiet neighborhood where people minded their business and nobody asked questions. She'd chosen it specifically for that quality. The anonymity. The erasure. Her 14-year-old son, Marcus, was at the kitchen table when she came through the door. He had his soccer uniform on, still damp with sweat, still smelling like grass and effort and the uncomplicated exhaustion of a kid whose biggest problem was whether he'd make the varsity cut. "Mom? Why are you home? You work until 11 on Wednesdays." Natalie set her keys on the counter. The metal made a small sound. Everything sounded loud now. Everything sounded like an ending. She sat at the Formica table, scarred, familiar, a surface that held 15 years of homework and spilled juice and the architecture of an ordinary life. She put her head in her hands. "Mom." One tear came. Then another. Not the quiet tears of sadness. The tears of a body that had finally been found, finally been made visible, finally been ordered to surrender something it was never supposed to carry into a place like this. Marcus had never seen her cry. Not once. Not when his father left. Not when her father died. Not through any of the small deaths that come with being a single mother in Houston. What happened? His voice was small. Unsure. A child's voice wondering if the ground beneath his feet was still solid. I saved a life today, Natalie said, and they fired me for it. That doesn't make sense. She should have lied. Should have said it was a misunderstanding, or a shift change, or something that made sense in the world he lived in. But the words that came out were, "Nothing about war makes sense." He stared at her. Really stared. The way children do when they suddenly understand they don't know the person in front of them. War? You're a nurse. The words hung in the kitchen air like shrapnel in the dust. She'd said it. After 8 years of speaking in whispers, of being nobody, of existing in the small spaces between other people's lives, she'd said the one thing that would change everything. She almost told him then. Almost explained the mortar attack on March 15, 2009, in a compound outside Tikrit where insurgent fire came from 3 directions and her aid station became a tomb in seconds, and 3 men she'd trained, Corpsman First Class James Rivera, Petty Officer Second Class Marcus Chen, Hospital Corpsman Third Class David Okafor, didn't come home. Almost explained the Navy Cross they gave her for extracting 12 Marines from that rubble with bullets still coming down like a metal rain, with her own leg bleeding through her pants, her shoulder torn open by shrapnel. Almost explained why she kept it in a safety deposit box where looking at it made her hands shake like they were shaking now. Almost explained why she walked away from the Navy without telling anyone where she went. Why she became invisible. Why anonymity felt like the only place she could breathe. "Forget it," she whispered. "I'm just tired." But she wasn't tired. She was being discovered. The skills she'd buried were surfacing like bodies in rising water. The combat boots in her locker, the pair she'd carried through 3 tours, the pair she'd kept as a reminder of who she used to be, here they were calling. She could feel it. The old life reaching through the walls she'd built. That night she lay awake in her dark room, listening to the rain come in across Houston like an invasion. She knew that Liam Dawson was improving. She knew that his oxygen saturation was holding steady, that his trachea was shifting back toward midline, that by morning he'd move his right foot intentionally instead of reflexively. She knew that Sergeant Major Dawson was a man who'd survived 18 years in the Marine Corps, which meant he didn't accept answers that didn't make sense. She knew that he was searching for the nurse who saved his son. At Mercy General, Dr. Hargrove sat in his office at 11:45 at night, reviewing emails and building momentum. The state nursing board would move fast. He'd made sure of that with a call to his former medical school professor, who knew the board's director. The legal counsel had sent preliminary notes suggesting that Natalie's personnel file, while technically clean, showed a pattern of independent judgment and initiative that exceeded established protocols. Code words for dangerous. Code words for insubordinate. He scheduled a department meeting for Thursday morning at 9:15. Title: Restoring Clinical Standards After a Breach of Protocol. Attendees: every physician on staff, every department head, every senior nurse. By 10 o'clock Thursday morning, Natalie Hayes would be a cautionary tale. By 11, she'd be a memory. He had no idea that Sergeant Major Dawson had made 3 phone calls to the Veterans Affairs Hospital in San Antonio. No idea that the VA records clerk, who'd served with the 2nd Battalion, 7th Marines, had remembered a name. Hayes. Something about Hayes. And Tikrit. That was it. No idea that a Marine Corps intelligence officer in Arlington was currently cross-referencing every Navy corpsman named Hayes who'd served with 2 7ths in Iraq between 2006 and 2012, and finding exactly one. No idea that at 11:53 that night, an email was being sent to the Navy Reserve Command requesting expedited verification of service records for Senior Chief Petty Officer Natalie Marie Hayes. No idea that the next morning would not go the way he planned. Sergeant Major Dawson didn't sleep that night. He sat in the plastic chair beside Liam's bed, watching the monitors, watching the boy's chest rise and fall, and reading the email on his phone over and over. The words blurred, service record confirmed. Expedited verification. Senior Chief Petty Officer Natalie Marie Hayes. Navy Cross. Combat Operations, Tikrit, 2007 through 2009. 12 wounded extracted under sustained fire. The phone trembled in his hands, not from weakness but from the collision of two truths he couldn't reconcile. The woman they'd cast out like broken equipment had worn the uniform he'd sworn to. The woman they'd humiliated had combat experience that made most Navy doctors look like residents. He pressed his forehead against the hospital bed rail and made a decision. By 0630 hours, he was on a secure line with the Navy Reserve Command. By 0900 hours, he'd placed calls to 3 senior officers at Naval Medical Center San Diego and requested deployment verification. By 1100 hours, he was sitting in a secure conference room at the Naval Air Station Annex 40 miles north of Mercy General, watching a Navy SEAL commander from Virginia open a classified folder with Natalie's name on it. Senior Chief extracted a 12-person casualty count in Tikrit, November 2008, the commander said, his voice carrying the weight of someone who'd been on the ground in that place. Sustained small arms fire. Truck was hit twice. No casualties among her team or patients. That's not luck, Sergeant Major. That's operational excellence. The commander slid photographs across the table, Natalie in desert camouflage, hands wrapped in tourniquets, face ash-covered and focused. A different version of the woman who'd quietly moved through pediatric ICU corridors. She walked away from that. Came to Houston. Became invisible. He closed the folder. Until she saved your son. By 1330 hours, a Marine Corps convoy was rolling north on I-10 toward Mercy General. For vehicles. 14 personnel in dress blues. The radio traffic was sparse and professional. By 1400 hours, news vans were racing toward the hospital, their scanners picking up military radio chatter that made their assignment editors sit up straight. The convoy pulled through the main entrance of Mercy General at 1415 hours exactly. Tires crunching on asphalt. Doors opening in unison. The sound of boots on polished tile, the distinctive military rhythm, 1 2 3 4, that makes civilians unconsciously step aside. A Marine colonel in dress blues led the group through the lobby. Behind him, a Navy SEAL commander in a service dress uniform that bore medals stacked like evidence. Behind them, 3 additional officers whose presence alone broadcast something had shifted in the gravitational field of the hospital. They marched directly toward the administrative wing. Heads turned. Phones started ringing. A resident dropped a chart. The colonel approached the information desk with the cadence of someone accustomed to doors opening before he reached them. We're here to locate Senior Chief Petty Officer Hayes. Natalie Marie Hayes. His voice filled the atrium. Not loud. Authoritative. The kind of voice that doesn't ask if you'll cooperate, it assumes you will. Within minutes, an all-hands page echoed through Mercy General's corridors. Not for a code. For someone who'd earned the right to be found. Dr. Hargrove heard about the convoy while sitting in a conference room reviewing the morning's lab results. He didn't understand, at first. Then his cell phone rang. Then 3 more calls came through simultaneously. Then the reality arrived like a rip current. The woman he destroyed had apparently owned the room all along. He stood up. Sat back down. His hands moved across the table without purpose, shuffling papers that suddenly meant nothing. Through the office window, he could see the news vans in the parking lot, their satellite dishes rising like periscopes hunting for a story. A story that was about to torpedo everything he'd built. The SEAL commander found Natalie on the 3rd floor of pediatric, standing at the medication dispenser, her movements efficient and invisible. He didn't announce himself. He simply stood 6 feet away and waited until she turned. When she saw the dress blues, her entire body went still. Not fear. Recognition. The way a door recognizes a key that fits. Senior Chief Petty Officer Natalie Hayes, he said. It wasn't a question. I'm Commander Robert Mitchell, Naval Special Warfare Command. You have a convoy waiting downstairs. Natalie's jaw tightened. One breath. Then, I'm on shift. Not anymore. Not by order. Mitchell's voice carried an echo of Tikrit, of operation she thought she'd left buried. Your Sergeant Major requested a verification of service. We confirmed it. The hospital board is being notified. You're coming with us. She didn't move. Nurses stared from the medication room. A resident froze mid-step. Natalie Hayes, the quiet one, the peripheral presence, the woman who'd been written up and escorted out, stood framed in the fluorescent hallway light while a Navy SEAL commander in full-dress blue uniform waited for her compliance. Let me clock out, she said finally. You're on military orders now. The clock out happens after. The walk to the elevator felt like moving through water. Natalie could feel the weight of eyes tracking her, colleagues trying to reconcile the timid nurse with whatever this moment meant. A code technician whispered something to the unit secretary. The administrative assistant's face went pale. By the time Natalie stepped into the elevator with Commander Mitchell, every phone on the pediatric floor was already ringing. They descended in silence. The doors opened to a chaos of controlled precision. The Marine colonel stood at the center of the atrium. Cameras flashed. Hospital staff lined the hallways, confused and suddenly aware they were watching something unprecedented. The colonel's voice carried across the hospital like a command. For the record, I'm reading the service record of Senior Chief Petty Officer Natalie Hayes. He held up a classified file. 3 Purple Hearts. 2 Bronze Stars with Valor. Navy and Marine Corps Commendation Medal. Each medal hung in the air for a beat. She conducted 76 combat trauma operations in theaters of war. She ran more field medical procedures than half-hour operational hospitals. She extracted 12 wounded Marines under sustained fire in Tikrit and brought every single one back breathing. The colonel turned directly toward the elevator bank where Dr. Hargrove's office overlooked the atrium. She's been here for 4 years. And yesterday, she did something 15 of your physicians said was impossible. She looked at an 8-year-old boy and refused to believe you. CEO Margaret Chen appeared from her office with hospital legal counsel flanking her like escorts. The moment stretched. Cameras captured her face, calculating, realigning, understanding the liability structure of what had just been made public. She looked at Dr. Hargrove's office door. She looked at the convoy. She looked at the news cameras. Dr. Hargrove, she said, her voice steady as a surgeon's hand. My office. Now. The next 20 minutes were a masterclass in institutional collapse. Legal counsel laid out the facts: retaliation against military personnel, falsification of medical records by omission, hostile work environment. A JAG officer explained that Senior Chief Hayes' service training explicitly authorized her to perform emergency needle decompression. A nursing supervisor confirmed she'd been instructed not to document the resident's observations of toe movement. The missed rib fracture was on imaging, but Hargrove had signed off on the radiologist's preliminary read without follow-up. You suspended her to protect your statistics, Chen said flatly. When her diagnosis proved correct, you doubled down. You filed a state complaint. You brought in outside counsel to intimidate her. Hargrove's face had cycled from red to white to something in between. I was following protocol. You were protecting your career. Chen's voice cut like a blade. And in doing so, you violated federal employment protections for a military veteran, falsely reported a nurse to a state board, and created documentation of intentional retaliation. She paused. Which the board of directors just reviewed on a conference call. Which the news vans outside are about to report. Which will ensure your medical license receives maximum scrutiny during review. By 1500 hours, Dr. Hargrove was escorted from Mercy General by security while cameras documented every step. His access credentials were deactivated. His office was locked. His department chair was relieved of duties pending investigation. The colonel found Natalie in a conference room where hospital administrators were formally rescinding her suspension. "Senior Chief," he said, and the title hung in the air like a salute. "Your sergeant major requests you visit his son. The boy's been asking for the nurse who saved him." In room 347, Liam Dawson's feet moved at Natalie's approach. Both of them. Real movement. Deliberate movement. His hand gripped his father's when Natalie entered, not reflexive, but conscious. Recognition. The boy whose spine 15 doctors had written off was squeezing his father's hand with measurable strength. Sergeant Major Dawson stood when she entered. For a moment, he didn't speak. Then, "Senior Chief." She almost corrected him. The habit of 4 years of invisibility almost made her say no, just Natalie, just a nurse. But she saw the way he looked at his son. Saw the boy's eyes follow her every movement. Saw the monitors showing improvement that shouldn't have existed according to every neurological principle Hargrove had cited. She moved to the window where sunlight streamed through in golden bars. From her locker in the break room, she'd retrieved her combat boots, tan leather, scuffed, carrying the dust of Tikrit and the weight of 3 Marines' names stitched inside her memory. She placed them on the windowsill where the afternoon light hit them directly. Boots that had walked through war. Boots that had walked through corporate hospitals trying to remain invisible. Boots that had finally, after 4 years, been allowed to exist in the same space as the woman who'd worn them. "At ease, Sergeant Major," she said quietly. "I'm just a nurse." "With respect, you're not just anything." His son squeezed his hand again. Movement in both legs. Breathing steadily. Alive and improving because one person had refused to accept what 15 others insisted was inevitable. Because someone had trusted the evidence of her own hands and the combat training that had taught her that the body survives in ways that statistics can't predict. The combat boots sat in the window, visible from the hallway where staff passed, each of them understanding now that they'd been working beside someone whose kindness wasn't weakness, but restraint. The kind of restraint that comes from having already survived the worst humanity can offer. 6 weeks later, Dr. Hargrove taught his first CPR certification class at Houston Community College. Minimum wage. No research. No board position. Just him and a plastic torso and the knowledge that every physician in Texas was reading about his case in their licensing update. His medical license remained under review. Natalie finished her shift at Mercy General the following Thursday. She clocked out at 2,300 hours, changed out of her scrubs, and felt the weight lift the way soldiers feel weight lift when a deployment finally ends. Her son was waiting in the parking lot. He didn't ask questions about the Marines anymore. He just sat next to her and understood that sometimes the quietest people in a room are the ones holding everything together. And if you're watching this right now, you've just witnessed what happens when institutional blindness meets someone who refuses to accept it. When speaking truth to power costs everything, but saves a life anyway. When the quietest person in the room might be the one carrying the weight of the world. Share this. Because somewhere right now, someone is being told they're wrong. Someone is being told to stay quiet. Someone needs to know that one person, one nurse, one voice, one refusal to accept what powerful people insist is inevitable, can change everything. Subscribe for more stories of the people who save lives when the system says they shouldn't exist.